The night was unusually cold for September, and I was typing away at my computer, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room. Big project at the office, I had told Mia, my voice a mixture of fatigue and a hint of something I hoped she couldn't detect. Lately, those late nights had become more frequent, a necessary evil in the world of IT. Or so I made it seem. Mia had been understanding, almost too understanding. That should have been my first clue. It wasn't until she found the hotel receipt, a slip of paper that felt like a brick thrown through the window of our lives, that things began to unravel. "This was from last Thursday," she said, her voice steady, the receipt in her hand shaking just slightly. "You said you were working late." I was. "It was for a client meeting," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes, a storm brewing in the calm. "But a hotel, Alex?" Her question was a dagger, and I had no armor. I scrambled for an explanation, any lifeline that would pull us back from the edge we were teetering on. "It was just more convenient, you know, with the project deadlines." My voice trailed off, unconvincing even to my own ears. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia's suspicion had taken root, and no amount of denial could weed it out. She began to watch me more closely, her glances lingering a little too long whenever I picked up my phone or stepped out of the room to take a call. The trust we had built over the years was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. Feeling cornered and isolated, Mia found solace in Ethan, a colleague of hers. Ethan, with his easy smile and listening ear, became her confidant, her escape from the growing chasm between us. Their affair, a secret dance in the shadows of our failing marriage, began shortly after. I was oblivious, caught up in my web of lies and half-truths, too consumed by my guilt to see the signs. The guilt, oh, it ate at me, a relentless, gnawing beast. Yet, I convinced myself it was Mia who had pushed me to this, her inability to trust, her constant questioning. I was the victim, or so I liked to think. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, our home became a battlefield, a constant tug of war between suspicion and denial. But it was Mia's heart that was the real casualty, torn between the love she once had for me and the new affection she found in Ethan's arms. In the end, it wasn't just about the late nights, the secret messages, or the hotel receipts. It was about us, Mia and I, and how far we had drifted from the shore of our love, caught in the currents of betrayal and regret. The emotional toll was evident, etched deep into Mia's face, a mirror of the turmoil raging inside her. And there I was, the architect of our downfall, watching helplessly as the life we had built together crumbled around us. The moment I decided to surprise Mia with breakfast in bed was the moment my world started to crumble. It was supposed to be a gesture, a bridge over the growing distance between us. Lately, I'd been trying harder, reaching out with affection in hopes of mending whatever rift had formed unseen. But as I balanced the tray in one hand, nudging our bedroom door open with the other, the sight that greeted me wasn't one of sleepy gratitude but of stark betrayal. There, on Mia's phone, illuminated against the morning dim, was a message that cut through any pretense of ignorance I might have clung to. "Can't stop thinking about you," it read, signed with a heart and Ethan's name. The phone, usually guarded like a treasure, lay forgotten in her rush to the shower, a silent confession on our sheets. The confrontation was inevitable, the words spilled out, heated and sharp, a clashing of hurt and betrayal. "Mia, what's this about Ethan?" My voice, a mix of anger and disbelief, filled the room as she returned, wrapped in a towel, the color draining from her face. Her confession was a blow, each word a hammer to the foundations of our marriage. Yes, there had been an affair. Yes, she had feelings for him. But it was my distance, my secrets, that had driven her to it. Or so she said. We stumbled into a temporary resolution, a band-aid over a gaping wound. Counseling, we agreed, was worth a shot. Mia would end things with Ethan, and we would try to salvage the ruins of our relationship. But the seed of doubt, once planted, is a tenacious thing. Despite her assurances, despite our sessions that peeled back layers of misunderstanding and pain, the disconnect lingered. It wasn't long before Mia relapsed into Ethan's arms. I could see it, the shift in her, a lightness that wasn't for me. And Ethan, with his own designs, wasn't content to be a secret any longer. He wanted Mia, all in, pushing her towards decisions that once would have been unthinkable. The day Mia spoke of leaving, of starting anew with Ethan, was the day I realized the full extent of my naivety. There was no anger left in me, only a profound, hollowing sadness. She felt trapped, she said, caught between duty and desire, and Ethan offered a way out. As I listened, the pieces fell into place. The late-night whispers, the guarded texts, the sudden trips out of town, to clear her head, all roads led to Ethan. And Mia, my Mia, was planning to leave, to dismantle the life we had built together for a chance at happiness with another man. In that moment, I understood the bitter truth of our unraveling. Love, once unshakable, could be eroded by neglect, by secrets, by the slow accumulation of unspoken hurts. Mia had made her choice, and in doing so, unveiled the depth of our estrangement. Our marriage, once the center of my universe, was now a constellation of could-have-beens, a story of love lost to the chaos of miscommunication and unmet needs. The moment I clicked send on the email to the private investigator, my heart was pounding against my chest like it was trying to break free. It felt like crossing a point of no return. Mia's late-night whispers, the secret glances at her phone, and now, the unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, every piece added weight to the sinking feeling in my gut. I wasn't prepared for the speed with which everything unraveled. Within days, the investigator laid bare the truth I had feared. Mia was having an affair with Ethan, and they were planning a future together, funded by our life savings. The evidence was irrefutable, a digital trail of deceit that painted a picture so cold it froze my insides. Armed with the truth, I faced Mia, the weight of betrayal hanging heavy between us. How could you? The question was a whisper, more to myself than to her. The confrontation was nothing like the explosive encounters you see in movies. It was quiet, a calm before the storm, laced with a sadness so deep it was palpable. I laid out the evidence before her, each piece a hammer to the facade she had built. The bank statements, the messages, the photos, undeniable proof of her infidelity and financial betrayal. You need to leave, I told her, my voice steady, belying the turmoil inside. Or face the consequences. It wasn't a threat, it was a resignation to the end of the life we had known. Mia's reaction was a mix of shock and realization. As the truth of Ethan's manipulation dawned on her, the layers of deceit peeled away, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable shell of the woman I once knew. Alex, her voice broke, a feeble attempt to salvage what was already lost. But it was too late. The damage was done. Mia had chosen her path, entangled in a web of lies and betrayal, and now she faced the consequences. She packed her things, a tangible symbol of the chasm that had grown between us, her departure marking the end of our shared story. In the days that followed, the emptiness of the house echoed the hollow feeling in my chest. Mia's downfall was complete. Her relationship with me, her financial security, her reputation, all sacrificed at the altar of a deceitful affair. And as for Ethan, he vanished into the shadows from whence he came, leaving Mia to face the aftermath alone. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that would take time to heal. But in the quiet that followed Mia's departure, I found a clarity. The end of our marriage was not just a loss, but a liberation from a relationship that had become a lie. Mia's downfall, while tragic, was a consequence of her choices, a harsh reminder that actions bear weight, and sometimes, the price of deceit is everything. The day Mia's legal battles began was the day I truly started to see the end of the tunnel. Not in terms of vengeance or satisfaction. Those feelings had long been buried under the weight of what had transpired, but in the sense of a new beginning, for both of us, albeit on vastly different paths. The legal documents piled on my kitchen table were a stark reminder of the financial mess Mia had entangled us in. Yet, as I sifted through bank statements and legal notices, a part of me couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for her. The Mia I had married, the woman I had loved, was now a shadow, caught in the consequences of her choices. Ethan's departure didn't come as a surprise. The moment the tide turned against Mia, he was gone, a specter evaporating at the first sign of trouble. It was cowardly, yet expected. Mia was left to face the music alone, her allies dwindling as the reality of her actions set in. The isolation that followed for Mia was palpable. Friends who we had shared dinners with, vacations, life's milestones, now crossed the street to avoid the fallout. Family, once a tight-knit circle, became distant, their disappointment a barrier too high for Mia to overcome. It was a loneliness that echoed through her life, a stark contrast to the vibrant social network that once surrounded us. In this new chapter of our lives, Mia's attempts at reconciliation were met with a cold reality. I had moved on, not out of spite but necessity. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too personal. My focus was on rebuilding, on finding peace in the aftermath of the storm. And in that process, I found someone new, someone who understood the scars I carried and saw beyond them. For Mia, the struggle was just beginning. With her reputation tarnished and her professional life in shambles, the uphill battle was steep. The affair, and all that followed, hung over her like a cloud, affecting every aspect of her life. Job opportunities that were once plentiful now seemed out of reach, her actions a barrier to moving forward. But it was in this desolation, this period of isolation and consequence, that the true cost of our choices came to light. Not through reflection or introspection, but in the tangible, often harsh, reality of starting over. Mia, once confident and full of life, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding from the ground up, with limited support and dwindling resources. As for me, my journey was one of healing, of finding a way to forgive, if not forget. The betrayal had reshaped my understanding of trust, of love, but it hadn't broken me. With a new relationship blossoming, I looked towards the future, one where the scars of the past were reminders, not roadblocks, of the life I was determined to rebuild. The morning Mia left for the new city marked a pivotal moment, not just for her, but for me as well. Standing in the doorway of our once shared home, watching her drive away, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sorrow, and an undercurrent of hope. Hope that Mia would find the fresh start she was so desperately seeking, and perhaps, in her journey, a path back to herself. In the weeks that followed, the silence of the house was a constant reminder of the void Mia's departure had left. But as I navigated through my own process of healing and moving forward, I couldn't help but wonder about Mia's journey in that new city, her struggles and triumphs in starting over. Mia's job search was anything but easy. The stain of our public fallout followed her like a shadow, her name synonymous with scandal in the tight-knit circles of her industry. Despite this, she pushed on, her resilience a testament to the woman I once knew. The offers that came were far from the prestigious positions she was accustomed to, a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. Adjusting to a more modest lifestyle was another hurdle. Gone were the days of impromptu getaways and lavish dinners. In their place, a budget that barely covered the essentials, each dollar a reminder of the financial security she had sacrificed. Building a new social circle was perhaps Mia's greatest challenge. The betrayal and deceit that had marred our marriage left her wary of new connections. Trust, once given so freely, was now a fortress she guarded zealously, allowing few to breach its walls. But it was her health that took the greatest toll. The stress of the past year, compounded by the challenges of her new life, manifested in sleepless nights and a constant battle with anxiety. The decision to seek medical help was a difficult one, admitting vulnerability in a way she never had before. Yet, it was a necessary step towards healing, both physically and emotionally. The conclusion of the legal battles brought a semblance of closure, though the victory was bittersweet. The financial support awarded was a fraction of what she had hoped for, a meager lifeline in her efforts to rebuild from the ruins of our marriage. In her moments of solitude, Mia reached out to old friends and estranged family members. Her attempts at reconciliation met with varying degrees of acceptance. Some doors opened, while others remained firmly closed, the damage too deep to repair. Through it all, Mia's journey was a testament to the human capacity for resilience. The path to redemption was fraught with obstacles, each one a lesson in humility and strength. And as she navigated this new chapter of her life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the woman she was becoming. A woman determined to rise from the ashes of her past, forging a future defined not by her mistakes, but by her unwavering resolve to move forward. The day I bumped into Mia at the downtown market, the air was crisp, a prelude to the coming fall. It was an ordinary Saturday, filled with the mundane task of grocery shopping with my new partner, Sarah. Our life together had become a comforting routine, a stark contrast to the tumultuous final years with Mia. As we turned the corner past the organic produce, there she was. Mia. The shock of seeing her was like a jolt of electricity, halting me in my tracks. She looked different, older, perhaps, or maybe it was the weight of her experiences that etched new lines on her face. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, time stood still. The encounter was brief, laden with unspoken words and heavy with the weight of our past. Mia's attempt at small talk felt strained, her voice a soft echo of the woman I once knew. Sarah, sensing the tension, remained politely distant, a silent support by my side. My responses were curt, not out of spite, but from a deep-seated need to protect the peace I had fought so hard to find. Mia's presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like an intrusion into the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. The realization hit Mia hard. The indifference in my voice, the casual way I introduced Sarah, it all underscored the irrevocable change in our relationship. We were strangers, bound only by the memories of a life that no longer existed. As Mia walked away, a part of me wanted to call out, to bridge the gap with words left unsaid. But I remained silent, knowing some distances were too vast to cross. The encounter was a stark reminder of the choices we had made, of the love we had lost, and the separate paths we now walked. In the weeks that followed, I heard snippets of Mia's life through mutual acquaintances. She had found a job, modest but fulfilling, a step towards the self-sufficiency she had struggled to find. New hobbies and interests filled her days, a testament to her resilience and determination to carve out a semblance of happiness in her new reality. Gradually, Mia began to accept her circumstances, embracing personal growth over regret. Her journey was a solitary one, marked by small victories and inevitable setbacks. But it was hers alone, a path she navigated with quiet strength and dignity. The finality of our separation became undeniable, a closed chapter in the book of our lives. Mia's reflection on our shared past, on the home we had built together, was a poignant reminder of what had been lost. But it was also a testament to the enduring power of love, a love that, despite its end, had once been the center of our world. As I watched Mia disappear into the crowd, a sense of closure enveloped me. Our story had ended, not with the bitterness of regret, but with the acceptance of life's impermanent nature. Mia's journey, like mine, was a search for peace, a peace we both had finally found, albeit on separate shores. The sun was just setting, casting a golden glow over the city as I walked home from work, the streets bustling with the usual evening crowd. It's in these quiet moments, amidst the chaos of daily life, that my thoughts drift back to Mia. Not with anger or regret, but with a reflective calm that time has granted me. Mia's journey, from the unraveling of our marriage to her solitary path towards self-discovery, had been fraught with hardship and introspection. It hadn't led to redemption in the traditional sense, there was no grand gesture or moment of forgiveness that magically erased the past. Instead, it brought her face to face with the stark reality of her choices and their irreversible impact on both our lives. Through it all, Mia learned, perhaps the hardest way possible, about the importance of integrity in relationships. The absence of honesty, the foundation upon which trust is built, had led to the unraveling of not just our marriage, but of her very sense of self. It was a lesson learned in the aftermath of loss, a painful reminder of the value of truth and transparency. Determined to start anew, Mia channeled her experiences into building a life marked by the lessons she had learned. There was no going back to the way things were, no undoing the damage wrought by deception and betrayal. Instead, she focused on moving forward, on creating a future that was authentically hers, unencumbered by the need for external validation. Her pursuit of happiness shifted from seeking approval and affection from others to finding a sense of inner peace and contentment. It was a journey inward, a quest for self-acceptance that transcended the external circumstances of her life. As I turned the key in my door, stepping into the warm, inviting space I now shared with Sarah, I couldn't help but reflect on Mia's story. It had become a cautionary tale, not just for me, but for anyone willing to listen. A tale of choices and consequences, of the complexity of human relationships, and the profound impact our actions have on the lives of those we love. In the end, Mia's story served as a somber reflection, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring importance of integrity and honesty in our relationships. It underscored the truth that happiness, true happiness, comes not from the approval of others, but from the peace and acceptance we find within ourselves. As the night settled in, casting shadows across the room, I realized that while Mia's journey had been hers alone, the lessons it imparted were universal. In the complex tapestry of human relationships, integrity and honesty are the threads that hold us together, guiding us through the challenges and leading us, ultimately, to a place of understanding. The wedding dress felt more like a costume than any girlhood dream. My hand shook holding the bouquet. Jordan looked fine, older, serious. My mom kept dabbing at tears like she'd already lost me. Dad just looked pissed, muttering something about, "good Christian boy," under his breath. "Well, what's done is done," Mom said in that fake cheerful way a month later, shoving boxes of baby stuff into our tiny apartment. "He's got a good job, at least." Jordan beamed over her shoulder. I wasn't sure if it was at me or the free crib. The whole big family talk was supposed to be later. Turns out, not so much after my family made it clear we were basically trailer trash now. Guess who's eating her words about one kid? Funny how that works. Jordan got his raise, those big family dreams got dusted off. I quit the diner job, said it was smarter with daycare costs. He didn't fight me on that. Less time around him meant less time pretending all this was some fairy tale. Truth is, I wasn't sure what I signed up for anymore. Those first few years, watching him leave before dawn, come back smelling of fast food. It started feeling less like a marriage, more like some job I hadn't applied for. Baby number 2 was supposed to fix all that, right? God knows my mom wouldn't shut up about grandkids. Years bled together. Doctor's appointments, ovulation trackers, all those negative pregnancy tests piling up. Jordan started getting that faraway look, the kind I was starting to wear like an old sweater instead of my wedding ring. Then the real fun started, that diagnosis, hanging over us like the church bells I thought I'd left behind. I knew what the doctor meant when he talked risks, but it felt like a dare more than a warning. We were all in, weren't we? Jordan and his big family dreams, my folks with their noses in our business. We both had something to prove. That empty hospital room felt like something out of a horror movie. The white walls were too bright, the smell of disinfectant too strong, like they were trying to scrub away the bad news hanging in the air. Jordan kept asking if I was sure they got the tests right. Bless him, he always had this way of making me feel a little bit crazy. I knew damn well what the doctor said, the echo of high risk of infertility just bouncing around in my head. My temper flared. They're doctors, Jordan, not idiots. Think they'd mess up something like this? He went quiet then, like a kicked dog. But when we got into the car, he turned to me, serious, and said, "Look, if it happens, it happens. We'll always have Jenny." It felt like a punch in the gut. It should have been sweet, a reassurance, but it felt more like giving up than anything else. The thought wouldn't leave my head. If this was it, just me and Jenny, would that be enough? Would that be enough for him? The chemo, I won't lie, it was hell. Hair falling out in clumps, the nausea that hit like waves crashing on a rock, and watching Jordan's face go thinner too. Worry does that to a person. But there was something else there too. I'd see it when he looked away from me, checking his phone on the sly. Like he was already imagining a different life, a life after this one. Worse than the chemo, worse than anything, was when they said it wasn't working. That lump in my throat started to feel like it might choke me out. That's when I told him, voice all shaky, this could be it, let's just go for it all, no holding back. He looked at me almost like I was a stranger, a sick stranger with no hope left. In the end, though, he nodded, that look of determination washing over him again. I remember the day I walked out of that hospital. It was gray and drizzly, the kind of day that makes you forget the sun even exists. I got home, took a long, hot shower, and stared at myself in the mirror. Bald, gaunt, but alive. And somehow, that felt like a different kind of power bubbling up. Maybe, just maybe, the game hadn't played out quite how I'd thought, but who said I couldn't change the rules? Even if I couldn't get pregnant, even if I lost the big family dream, maybe there were other dreams to fight for. The first fake pregnancy test. I remember it so clearly. Staring at that little pink line that wasn't supposed to be there, my whole body started buzzing. It wasn't guilt, exactly, not at first. More like stepping through a door I hadn't even realized was there the whole time. One I wasn't sure I ever would have been brave enough to walk through. Jordan, God love him, came home jumping around the kitchen like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't look at me any different, but everything felt different. The way he lingered at the kitchen table, talking about moving to a bigger place, painting the spare room. I hated myself for how I soaked it in, playing the part perfectly. Even found myself looking at nursery furniture online. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew I had to. Then, the miscarriage. Another blur. Doctors poking and prodding, hushed voices, the smell of antiseptic. But in those hazy hospital days, in between the cramps and the tears, I felt something else. A strange kind of relief. Like, I had passed a test I didn't even know I was taking, and came out just fine on the other side. A couple more miscarriages, and even Jordan's optimism started to crack. He'd always been the glass half full type, but this was wearing him down. I could see it behind the smiles, the way he'd linger in the doorway before bed like he didn't want to disturb me. That's the thing about pity, gets old real fast. Then it happened, the stillbirth. That one almost broke me. The hospital room spinning, the nurses with those sad, practiced smiles. Jordan held my hand so tight it felt like he'd crack the bones, tears streaming down his face. But underneath the grief, that same relief I'd felt before flickered to life. Like a candle in a storm that couldn't quite be extinguished. Until that day he sat me down, all serious, and said, look, if it happens again, just don't tell me until you're sure, all right? Too much heartbreak. I played the wounded wife, sniffling and nodding. He played the strong husband, the one protecting me. Inside, that candle flame grew a little brighter. The truth? I felt like I'd won the damn lottery. The perfect excuse, wrapped up in pity and concern. And Jordan? Well, he became less a husband and more like a project. Something to manage, to keep on track. He started working all those extra hours, eyes on the prize, that big family, that big house he thought was still on the horizon. Me? I kept up the act. A doctor's appointment here, a tearful breakdown there. Every time, he stepped up, moved forward, and I got to call the shots. It was a hell of a lot better than those early days, feeling like I was on some kind of probation. Waiting to prove I was worthy enough for the life we were supposed to have. The first time I looked at another man like really looked, it caught me by surprise. He was in that new coffee place Jordan hates, the one with the fancy names and prices to match. I was picking up some latte monstrosity to bribe Jordan into a good mood about a doctor's appointment. Not a real doctor, obviously, but they don't need to know that, do they? Anyway, this guy was young, probably close to my age when I got hitched. One of those fit, outdoorsy types, all muscles and easy smiles. It wasn't even attraction, not at first. More like envy. That carelessness, the way nothing seemed to hang heavy on his shoulders. Thing is, Jordan started to look different after that. Not physically, but smaller, somehow. The way he'd come home with that tired slump, the takeout bag already in his hand like it was part of the routine. That big family dream just seemed to wear him down a little more each day. I'm not proud of what happened next. Turns out there's a certain kind of power in feeling invisible. Jordan buried in spreadsheets and daycare pickups, me with my fake appointments and carefully timed tears. We were like ships passing in the night. Then, at some stupid work dinner for Jordan, I noticed him. Across the room, all cocky smiles and easy charm, and just like that, something snapped inside me. It wasn't an old flame, hell no, I'm not that dumb. More like reaching for proof that I still had a spark left. That first kiss tasted like stolen candy and cheap champagne. The guilt hit me later, like a bad hangover, but it faded fast. Because underneath it all, this felt right. Like I was getting something back that had been taken from me without me even knowing. Jordan got his late nights at work. I got mine too. Lies piled on top of lies, each one easier than the last. Getting pregnant wasn't hard this time. Obsessively tracking ovulation, every twinge and ache amplified. And then that damn line showed up on the test again. It wasn't the same rush this time, not like the first fake ones. It was more purposeful. Like a twisted kind of victory lap. I stared at that test, then at myself in the mirror. Was I scared? Sure. But more than anything, I felt steady. The ground under my feet finally felt solid. Jordan had his big family plans, and, well, now I had my own. Jordan's face was a mask when I slid those divorce papers across the table. I'd practiced this moment. Pictured the shock, the anger, maybe even a flicker of the old Jordan pleading with me to reconsider. What I got was cold. Colder than any of those late nights, any of those pitying glances. I know, was all he said. Just those two words, and that spark of something, maybe even satisfaction, flickering behind them. Turns out, that big shot work promotion wasn't just about more money. It was also about longer hours, business trips, the perfume on his collar that wasn't mine. I'll give him this, he wasn't stupid, but neither was I. Before, those whispers of betrayal had fueled a kind of desperation. Now, it was something sharper, something steadier. Like flipping the game board, Jordan and his stupid dreams didn't matter as much anymore. I had my own plan to think of now. Hitting that 4-month mark was a different kind of milestone. Not the hopeful kind, more like the point of no return. Every day that bump grew bigger was another piece of leverage, another nail in the coffin of whatever future Jordan thought he had. I imagined myself telling him, the look on his face, not some tearful confession, but a declaration of war. But then, doubt crept in. The kind you feel in the pit of your stomach before a storm. What if it didn't work? What if he still walked away, tossed me and the baby aside like an old toy? That flicker of fear wasn't just about getting caught, it was about ending up with nothing. So I waited. Each trip to the mailbox was a gamble, divorce summons, or my little ace in the hole finally ready to play. It became a kind of sick addiction, that waiting. One day I'd feel strong, in control, ready to blow up his whole world. The next, that fear would bubble up again, making me want to hide, to curl up into some smaller version of myself. One thing was for sure, there was no going back. Not after I came this far. Every day it got harder to play the concerned wife routine, but easier to pretend that my whole world wasn't hanging by a thread. Each lie I told, each time I touched my belly and smiled, I was building a wall between him and me. Soon enough, he'd be just another player in my game, and let's face it, I was getting rather good at playing. The day I told him, it was a gamble. I'd tried to play it cool, waiting until he got home late, that tired look back in his eyes. Dropped the news like it was nothing, by the way, I'm pregnant. I watched him, waited for the shock, the confusion, even some flicker of obligation. Instead, That coldness I knew so well just spread across his face. Doesn't matter, he said, voice flat. Doesn't change anything. That's when the panic set in. All those carefully laid plans crumbling around me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was meant to make him stay, beg even. What do you mean? It's your child. I spat, but even I didn't sound convincing. He laughed then, a bitter sound. Is it though? He pulled out his phone, scrolled through some messages, photos, him with another woman, younger, prettier, laughing in a way I haven't seen in years. You think I don't know, he said. You think I'm that stupid? Suddenly, it wasn't about the baby anymore, it was about power, about who had the upper hand. But he was one step ahead, damn him. The courtroom scene was a blur. Lawyers in fancy suits tossing around words like fraud and coercion. Jordan sitting ramrod straight, not even looking at me. But the moment the pregnancy was mentioned, everything shifted. His face twisted in anger, not the guilt I'd hoped for. His lawyer was sharp, painted me as this desperate woman, faking everything, even the cancer, to cling on to a marriage that was already over. My lies were laid bare, twisting in the air like dirty laundry. It should have been humiliating, but mostly, I just felt empty. Each accusation that landed was a blow against my own delusion, that clever plan shattered into 1,000 ugly pieces. Outside, reporters swarmed like flies. Everyone had an opinion now, it seemed. Some pitied me, the scorned wife. Others called me a monster, a manipulative witch. But through the noise, one thing was clear, it wasn't a victory, or some clever revenge. It was just a damn mess. And the worst part was, I was the one who'd made it. That damned lab coat sat on the kitchen table like a ticking bomb. It was Jordan's idea, the DNA test, paid for with money he probably shouldn't have spent on proving what he already knew in his gut. I tried to refuse, played the indignant mother-to-be, but in the end, I knew it was pointless. The clinic was all cold surfaces and even colder faces. The nurse drew blood from the baby, my baby, like I was nothing. And then came the waiting. Each day was a slow chokehold, the truth hanging in the air, ready to strangle me. The results came in a plain brown envelope. I didn't even have the nerve to open it myself. Jordan slid it across the table. 2 words stared back at me, not the father. The room seemed to spin. See, his voice was flat, dead. It was all a lie, the whole damn thing. Part of me should have felt relief. If the baby wasn't his, he couldn't walk away with it, right? But mostly, I just felt hollow. Like I'd fallen down some deep, dark well and could hear the echo of my own ruin. It got worse. Much worse. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was methodical. The lawyers came back, armed with a pile of evidence. I guess he'd been busy while I was playing my stupid games. The doctor who treated me during chemo. Turns out they'd gotten a sworn statement. The warnings about infertility were all documented. Every fake pregnancy test, every tearful breakdown, laid bare for the courts and anyone else who cared to look. And they did look. The newspapers had a field day. The desperate housewife, the cancer lie, the baby that wasn't even his. My folks went silent, ashamed. My daughter looked at me like I was some kind of monster in her own house. The friends I had left, the ones who bought my act, well, they evaporated too. Turns out, playing with fire gets you burned. I wasn't just getting a divorce anymore, Jordan was coming after me for everything. Some fancy legal word, fraud, something about intentional damage and ruining his reputation. I lost the house, the little bit of savings I had. Hell, I even lost my damn car. Every day I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the cops to show up at my dingy apartment, ready to make an example out of me. I should have been smarter, should have known there was no way to win this game. But it's too late for should-haves now. The first time I saw him again, it was in the grocery store of all places. He hadn't even been my type, not really. But desperation makes you look at the world differently. I almost didn't recognize him at first, clean-shaven, wearing some kind of work shirt like he was a normal guy just buying cereal. Pathetic, really. He didn't see me at first, crouched down looking at boxes like he knew what the hell he was doing. Then our eyes met, and I saw that flicker of recognition. Disgust, mostly. But underneath it, a hint of fear. Maybe that's what finally snapped me out of my fog. I walked right up to him, close enough he could smell the stale coffee on my breath. You know, I said, real casual like, the funny thing is, I'm glad. Glad you're not the father. That kid deserves a better life than I could give it. His face went pale, hand tightening around that cereal box. I leaned in closer, whispered low enough only he could hear. You think this is over? Oh, honey, this is just getting started. He tried to move past me, but I grabbed his arm, nails digging in. He actually flinched. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled takeout bags and unpaid bills, a plan slowly forming in my head. Jordan had his fancy lawyers, his new life, that smug look on his face like he'd won. But wars aren't won in courtrooms, are they? I started small. Rumors spread online. His new girlfriend's old clients, his company's so-called ethical practices. People love a scandal, especially when it involves someone who's already fallen from grace. I got good at it. Fake accounts, burner phones, lies planted so carefully they sprouted up like weeds. Each one a twist of the knife, a little dose of the kind of chaos I'd become so familiar with. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd think back to that girl in the white dress, all those stupid dreams about a family that would never be. A part of me mourned her, that naive fool. But this me, the one sitting in the dark with revenge burning in her eyes? She felt alive in a way I hadn't in a long, long time. Let Jordan have his courtroom victories. My battlefield was the shadows, and I was just getting warmed up. After all, hell hath no fury like a woman who's got nothing left to lose. Sometimes I dream about having a time machine. Not for the big stuff, winning the lottery or changing history or whatever. Just for the little moments. Going back to that first date with Jordan, the way he smiled across the too fancy restaurant table. I'd whisper in my own ear, run, you stupid girl. Run far, far away. Of course, it doesn't work like that. But after what feels like 100 nights of the same bad dream, I'm starting to think a little delusion might not be so terrible. I even tried those cheesy meditation apps, the ones with the calming voices telling you to breathe. Turns out, rage doesn't mix too well with inner peace. The worst part is the quiet. My dingy apartment with its peeling paint and squeaky floors. No more fake happy chatter with Jenny over homework she's too smart for anyway. No more of Jordan's footsteps coming down the hall, that sigh he'd give that meant either stress or just plain disgust. Just me in that empty space where my grand plan was supposed to be. My lawyer had called, that pitying woman with her sensible shoes and sad eyes. Something about Jordan filing for full custody, how my instability made me an unfit mother. Mother. I choked on the word, tasting bile. Maybe Jordan was right all along. Maybe I was nothing but a monster. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. There's only one way to go, and that's up. And maybe up doesn't mean back to some pretend life of white picket fences and birthday parties. Maybe up means something different entirely. A voice whispered in my head, the same one that used to keep me up at night plotting revenge. Only this time, it didn't sound right off the bat. Let me paint you a picture of the night everything started to change. Picture this. A business gala, swarming with the city's finest, glitz, glam, and wealth oozing out of every corner. And there he was, standing out by not trying to stand out at all. Dressed simply among the sea of tuxedos and glittering dresses, he had this quiet confidence about him that caught my eye. It wasn't just the way he carried himself, it was like he had this secret, knowing he didn't need the flash to be noticed. And notice him, I did. Fast forward a bit, and our courtship flew by in a whirlwind. I mean, the man was like a walking dream, kind, attentive, and oh, did I mention loaded? When he popped the question at this ultra-private dinner, overlooking the city lights with a ring that was simplicity and elegance rolled into one, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Yes, couldn't leave my lips fast enough. We got hitched and moved into this sprawling estate that was something straight out of a magazine. Every day felt like I was living in a dream. My days were filled with planning parties, shopping sprees, and basically living it up. I'd brag to anyone who'd listen about how I'd snagged a life of luxury by marrying him. It was all so easy, or so I thought. Then came the prenup talk. He brought it up casually after the wedding, calling it a mere formality. Me? I brushed it off like it was nothing. In my head, I was in control, and those assets might as well have been mine already. But here's the thing, despite all his wealth, he was all about giving back. Volunteering, donating to shelters, you name it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why waste your fortune on others when you can grow it? I'd nag him, pushing for more luxury, more everything. He'd just smile that calm smile and continue with his charity work. I saw it as a weakness. He's too soft, I'd tell my friends, convinced he'd never dare to leave the cushy life I gave him. Boy, was I living in a bubble. His business trips picked up pace, leaving me to my own devices in our mansion. And I loved it, throwing parties, living the high life without him breathing down my neck. It felt like freedom. But let's be real, freedom came with its own set of blinds. I was so caught up in my world of extravagance, I missed the signs. The man was slipping away, and I was too busy flaunting my status to notice. It was all about the image, the prestige, the look at me lifestyle. And in my twisted view, his absence was just another opportunity to shine solo. Reflecting on those days, it's clear I was dancing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by my own greed. Each lavish party, each dismissive laugh at his generosity, was a step closer to the edge. And all the while, he watched in silence, his quiet confidence morphing into a resolve I was too self-absorbed to see. It was a game of chess I didn't even know we were playing. And as it turns out, he was always several moves ahead. The day he asked me to take a closer look at our finances, I laughed it off. Come on, we're not one of those couples who needs to nickel and dime, I said, brushing aside his concerns like they were just another one of his eccentric quirks. My lifestyle, our lifestyle, demanded a certain level of spending, and I wasn't about to start pinching pennies. But then, he caught me red-handed, mid-splurge on yet another designer bag that I absolutely did not need, but absolutely had to have. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked in. Disappointment mixed with a hint of disbelief. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. That look said it all. And me? I just shrugged it off and continued with my day, convinced he'd get over it. As time went on, he began to pull away, burying himself in his work. I told myself he was just busy, too caught up in the grind to worry about my spending habits. It was easier than facing the truth. Then the whispers started. Financial trouble, they said. I laughed louder than anyone. Us? In financial trouble? Impossible. The money was endless, it had to be. I waved away their concerns with a flick of my perfectly manicured hand and planned another party. But he wasn't playing along anymore. We need to cut back, he told me one night, his voice firm, a stark contrast to his usual easygoing nature. I stared at him, incredulous. Cut back? Are you kidding? What are you hiding? I accused. Sure that he was stashing away money for himself, keeping me out of the loop. He didn't get angry. Instead, he did something far worse. He sat me down and showed me the numbers. Our accounts, the ones I thought were bottomless, were bleeding out, drained by my constant demands. It's all going, he said quietly, pointing to the stark figures. I couldn't believe it. You're lying, I shot back, unable to accept that our empire was crumbling. But the bombshell was yet to come. One evening, after I'd spent hours arguing about why we couldn't possibly cancel my upcoming soiree, he handed me a folder. "Look," he urged, and for once, I did. Inside were statements, documents, all pointing to the same grim reality. Our wealth wasn't liquid, it was tied up in investments, properties, and yes, charitable foundations. The truth hit me like a slap. All this time, I'd been living in a fantasy, spending money that wasn't really there, ignoring his attempts to make me see reason. And there he was, trying to protect not just our future, but the commitments he'd made to causes far bigger than our next party. I looked up from the papers, finally ready to listen, but the damage was done. The gap between us had widened into a chasm, filled with my denials and his disappointments. In my quest for more, I'd failed to see the most valuable thing I had. And now, I wasn't sure if it was too late to start digging us out of the hole I'd so carelessly thrown us into. Just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, I stumbled upon a document he'd carelessly left out. It was a detailed plan to liquidate some of our assets. My first thought, sweet, he's finally getting his act together to fund my desires. Boy, was I wrong. The notes scribbled on the margins about financial recovery went completely over my head. I was too caught up in my fantasy world to see the red flags waving right in front of me. Then the unthinkable started happening. One by one, his precious luxury items began disappearing. The fancy cars, the designer watches, even some of the artwork that used to adorn our walls. To me, it seemed like a temporary fix. "We'll get them back in no time," I told myself, completely oblivious to the depth of our financial sinkhole. His whole vibe changed too. Gone was the laid-back guy the first married, replaced by someone who was practically a stranger. He was distant, buried in his work like it was the only thing that mattered. I mistook his quiet desperation for dedication, thinking he was just on a mission to rebuild our empire. How naive I was. Even when a close friend pulled me aside, hinting that he was considering some drastic moves to salvage our finances, I just laughed it off. He wouldn't dare, I thought, so sure of my grip on him and our lifestyle. But then came the reality check. I had this grand plan for an international getaway, imagining us sipping cocktails on some exotic beach. When I floated the idea by him, expecting the usual nod, he shut it down immediately. "We can't afford it," he said, "no room for negotiation." I was livid. "What do you mean we can't afford it? Are you some kind of fraud?" I accused, my voice dripping with disdain. He just stood there, silent, the weight of his resignation hanging between us. But he wasn't done trying. In a last-ditch effort to make me see sense, he arranged a meeting with a financial advisor. "Let's manage our expenses together," he suggested, hoping to bring me back to reality. I saw it as a slap in the face. Manage expenses? Do I look like I need to budget? I stormed out, fueled by a mix of anger and denial, leaving him standing in the middle of our crumbling world. Looking back, each of these moments was a crossroads, a chance to turn things around. But I was too wrapped up in my own version of reality to take them. Each action, each warning sign, was a piece of the puzzle I refused to put together. And as our world continued to fall apart, I clung to the fantasy, unwilling to face the truth that was staring back at me. The day the bills started piling up was the day I should have realized our castle was built on sand. Envelopes stamped with "Final Notice" and "Past Due" became my dirty little secrets, shoved into drawers and under piles of magazines. I was too ashamed to admit the truth, even to myself. Our lavish lifestyle, once the envy of everyone we knew, was crumbling around us, and I was too proud to face it. But he had other plans. Plans that didn't involve hiding in the shadows of our debts. He called a family meeting, laying bare the skeleton of our financial ruin for all to see. There, in front of the very people whose admiration I craved, he peeled back the curtain on our mess. I was mortified, feeling utterly betrayed. How could he air our dirty laundry like that? The aftermath was brutal, my family's disappointment cut deeper than any unpaid bill. Yet, in my pride, I found a scapegoat in him. It was easier to blame his mismanagement than to admit my part in our downfall. "You're the reason we're in this mess," I accused, deflecting my guilt onto him. His response was a cold, hard ultimatum. "We downsize, or we're done," he said, his voice void of the warmth it once held. I laughed in his face, calling his bluff. There was no way I'd give up my designer clothes and fancy cars, not for him, not for anyone. Behind my back, he was making moves. Meetings with lawyers, quiet discussions about the future, our future, which he seemed increasingly convinced didn't include me. I was oblivious, continuing my charade of affluence even as our empire was auctioned off piece by piece. Then came the bombshell, dropped casually over coffee by a friend who could no longer keep his secret. "He's planning to leave you," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of pity and concern. "And he's taking everything with him." I scoffed, dismissing her words as mere gossip. "My husband, leave me? Impossible." I was too confident in my control, too blinded by arrogance to see the writing on the wall. The change in him was palpable. The man I married, once vibrant and full of life, had become a ghost of his former self. His warmth had turned to ice, his love replaced by a distant resignation. I mistook his detachment for weakness, foolishly believing I could twist him around my finger once more. But the final blow was yet to come. One ordinary morning, amidst the facade of normalcy, he handed me an envelope. Not another bill, but something far more definitive: divorce papers. Citing irreconcilable differences and my flagrant disregard for our financial well-being, he was cutting the cord. I stared at the documents in disbelief, the reality of his decision slicing through my denial like a knife. The realization that my actions, my refusal to acknowledge our reality, had driven us to this point was a bitter pill to swallow. There, in the silence of our once happy home, surrounded by the trappings of a life we could no longer afford, the truth hit me. My reckless spending, my stubborn pride, had cost me everything. And as he walked away, leaving me with nothing but the echo of our past, I understood the true price of my folly. When he slapped those divorce papers on the table, something in me just refused to take it seriously. I laughed it off, a knee-jerk reaction to what I thought was just another one of his attempts to scare me straight. "He'll never go through with it," I told myself, convinced more than ever that this was all just a dramatic play for control, a final stand in a game I was sure I was winning. But then, he did something I never saw coming. He packed up his things, just a few personal items, and walked out of our once shared estate. The mansion that had been a symbol of our lavish lifestyle suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too empty. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room the moment he left, and I was left to wander the halls alone, surrounded by all the luxury that now felt like nothing more than gilded cages. Determined to fight back, I hired a lawyer. I was sure I could challenge the prenup, convinced that there was no way he could leave me with nothing. My lawyer, though, wasn't so optimistic. "This is going to be a tough fight," he warned me, but I brushed off his concerns. I was too caught up in my own narrative of victimhood and entitlement. Court was a rude awakening. There he was, calm and collected, laying out the terms of the prenup I had so carelessly signed, too blinded by love and greed to pay attention to the details. It was ironclad, protecting not only the wealth he had before we married but also anything he'd earn afterward. I had been so sure of my place by his side, so confident in the empire we'd built together, that I hadn't considered the possibility of it all crumbling down. The judge's ruling was like a punch to the gut. I was left with a fraction of what I had expected, my lavish lifestyle reduced to a memory overnight. As I sat there, numb and disbelieving, I realized just how much I had overplayed my hand. Then came the final blow. He sold the estate, the very heart of our extravagant life together, and all I got was a modest sum to start anew. It was a fraction of what I had once thrown around without a second thought. Watching my dreams of luxury fade away was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder of the consequences of my actions. But what hurt the most wasn't the loss of wealth or status, it was watching him from afar, seeing him rebuild his life without me. He invested wisely, lived modestly, and slowly but surely, his reputation in the community was restored. People admired him for his resilience, his generosity, and his ability to start over. Meanwhile, I was left in the shadows, grappling with the reality of my situation. I had underestimated him, taken his love and his patience for granted, and now I was paying the price. The man I had mocked for his weakness had shown a strength and wisdom I couldn't even begin to match. As I navigated my new reality, living off the modest sum he had left me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and regret. He had emerged from our tumultuous marriage with his dignity intact, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered ego and squandered opportunities. Who knew the high life could crash so hard? There I was, scraping by, trying to hold on to any shred of the lifestyle I once took for granted. My bank account bled out from the lavish habits I couldn't shake, each swipe of the card digging me deeper into a hole I had no idea how to climb out of. Trying to slip back into our old social circles was like walking into a wall of ice. News of my downfall had spread like wildfire, painting me as the villain in his triumphant story of survival. The looks of pity mixed with disdain were almost worse than the outright rejections. I had become a pariah, an outcast from the world I once ruled. It hit me then, the full weight of what I'd lost. Not the money or the status, but him, the man whose strength I had mistaken for weakness, whose love I had squandered. That realization was a gut punch, leaving me reeling with regret but no closer to redemption. Meanwhile, he was on every front page, the phoenix rising from our ashes. He'd launched a new venture, and it was a hit. The stories weren't just about his success, they were about his comeback, his resilience. I watched from the shadows, my heart aching with envy and regret for what could have been. I tried reaching out, desperate for a bridge over the chasm I'd created. But every attempt was met with silence. The door was firmly shut, the finality of his departure a bitter pill I was forced to swallow alone. In a last-ditch effort to stay afloat, I sold off the luxury items I had clung to. Each sale was a band-aid on a bullet wound, barely making a dent in the debts that loomed over me. The jewels, the clothes, the handbags, all gone, one by one, until all that was left were the memories of better days. The news of his remarriage was a quiet affair, but it echoed loudly in my empty world. He had found someone who shared his values, a stark contrast to the superficial life we had led together. It was a happiness I had never given him, a truth that stung more than any loss of wealth. My legal battles to claw back some of his assets were futile. Each failed attempt drained what little I had left, leaving me with nothing but legal fees and a growing sense of despair. Eventually, he moved abroad, cutting all ties with the life we had shared. I was left behind, a ghost haunting the remnants of our past, facing the consequences of my choices alone. The friends who once flocked to our lavish parties, drawn by the allure of our wealth, vanished. Their abandonment was the final nail in the coffin of my social standing. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. The move to a modest apartment was the last step in my descent. Gone were the mansions, the sprawling estates, replaced by four walls that felt more like a prison than a home. My fall from grace was complete, a stark reminder of how far I had come, and how far I had fallen. In the quiet solitude of my new reality, I reflected on the irony of my situation. I had coveted his wealth, only to end up with nothing but the bitter memories of my greed. The luxury, the parties, the endless spending, all of it felt like a distant dream, a fleeting illusion that had slipped through my fingers. As I watched the sunset from my small balcony, the finality of my loss washed over me. He had left, taking his riches and the last shred of my dignity with him. My journey of betrayal and greed hadn't led me to a new beginning, it had dragged me to an irrevocable end. There was no redemption, no second chances, just the harsh truth of my actions and the solitude they had